The latest release of Business Center Heavy Construction Edition provides some excellent new features and product improvements. To learn all the new features, review the release notes accessible from the support ribbon inside the application. In this video, we will demonstrate a handful of these new features. Business Center Heavy Construction Edition now supports non-Trimble software vendors to include Leica, Carlson, Sakia, and more. To show you an example of what we're talking about, if you've got a field crew who's using a Carlson device out in the field to collect data, or Carlson data collector with Carlson software, or even converting it to a fieldbook file, you can now bring that data into Business Center. So here's an example of a serve CE or an RW5 file, and all we have to do is left click from our Windows Explorer and drag and drop it directly into Business Center. So now this feature provides anybody to use Business Center as their choice for processing survey data. So you'll see that you'll get the full functionality of what Business Center provides when you import that data. So not only are you looking at just ASCII file coordinates, but you actually look at all the observations. So I can come in here and see errors, I can check my backsites, I can make traverse adjustments, I can go into the total station editor and actually edit and manipulate the RW5 file. So here I can come in and actually look at all the observations. I can come in and make changes to some of these observations as needed, and adjust target heights or change codes, whatever I need to do to the raw data, and it will update and adjust inside the software. To show you another example, I'm just going to delete that file. So simply by deleting the file from my Project Explorer, it removes it, and we'll go out and we'll grab the other two files. So here I have 2 days of survey data in an Autodesk fieldbook file format, and I'm just going to select them both, left click, and drag and drop them in. That will process both files, and I'll have the same functionality that I just showed you with the RW5 file. So now I've got this data, it's points, I can process the feature codes for field to finish, build my surface, do my text, my drafting, my mapping, and I've got my as-built, or I've got my existing conditions topo, or whatever it is that you're collecting out in the field with your survey equipment. So again, great new functionality inside of the latest release of Business Center. Another new feature in Business Center Heavy Construction Edition is the improvements to the blocks. When creating a block, you can have multiple insertion points. Now I'm going to show you an example here of what the multiple insertion points can do, but this also parlays into your survey collection with the same type of block and what's known as a new block feature code in the collection process. So we'll start with creating the block first, and then we'll show you how this applies to survey collection. So I have a drop inlet here as an example, and when you insert this block, you have an insertion point, but then you have to come in and rotate it along the line. Well, when you create the block now, and let's call this, we'll call this a drop inlet, and we're going to select the object, so we'll just come in and select those. Now it's going to ask us for an insertion point. So we could put the center as the insertion point. We could also put this corner as the insertion point, or that corner as the insertion point. So let's go ahead and just we'll put the midpoint of this line as the initial insertion point. So if the field crew collects that location right there at the center, then they have an optional second location point where they maybe select the end of the drop inlet. So the idea with this drop inlet is obviously it wants to be rotated along the curb line, but also it may have a longer throat, right? So depending on where you're at in the country, you may have a longer inlet. So this will allow the block to actually size and scale accordingly. And then you also have a third where we could maybe throw in the back corner, and we could locate that as well. That's an optional insertion point. So I'm going to click create to create the block. It tells us that it was created, so we'll close that. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to come up here and let's go ahead and insert that block. All right, so this just still remains a bunch of individual line segments, but the block has been defined. So now when we come up and insert the block, we'll go ahead and we'll select that particular drop inlet. Obviously pick a layer we want it to go to, and then the location will be the first point. So let's say that we want to put this at this location here, so I'll say nearest to line right there. And now you can see the second insertion point is letting me select where I want to put in that second point. So you can see I can orient it, I can scale it. So again, we'll just go nearest to line again, pick this line here. And then the third one lets us scale it this way, all right? So we can either flip it this way or flip it that way. So let's just say we just pick that point there. So now we've picked the 3 insertion points for that block, and we'll click insert, and now that block is set in our project. And we can do that repetitively around the site. So again, this is from a creating of the block, and I'm going to show you now if this particular feature was out in the field and you had to collect it, how that would come back into Business Center and how you're going to go about collecting it out in the field. We'll show you that next. So the Feature Definition Manager also has some improvements, and this ties into what we were just showing you with the multiple insertion point block, or the multi-block feature coding that's been added to the Feature Definition Manager. Before I get into that, a couple other things that are new is the ability to import, export file formats and CSV files, so that you can bring in, if you're working with a third-party vendor and you've already got a feature attribute library already set up, you can bring that into Business Center so that you can use it within Business Center and within your Trimble devices. But if you're not using Trimble devices, this Feature Definition Manager can still be used to create your FXL file, which is used inside of Business Center to actually do the processing and the automated field to finish. What's new here is the ability to use that multi-insert point block that we created in the previous video. So here you can see that we've got a new feature definition. So instead of not just a point or a line or a polygon, we now have a block feature definition, as well as a control code for the block control code. So to get this all to work, you need 3 things. You need a block, you need to have a block control code, and you need to have the block defined as a feature definition. So we'll go ahead and we'll create the control code. So we'll come in here, we'll create a block control code. We're just going to call this, we'll call it OR for orientation. So we'll just name it orientation. And then the code we'll use is maybe OR, right? So we're just picking that code. It's not a code that's used in hopefully anything else, either a different code or a different feature. Business Center will tell us, or the Feature Definition Manager will tell us this. Now you can see here that you can say, what does this do? Does it just rotate the block? Does it construct the block using this insertion as an insertion point? As this point, the second point, next point as insertion points? Or does this construct the block using this point and the next 2 points as insertion points? So we can play around with different results on how this code works, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to use this one for now. Just use this as an example. And now that we have that, we need to create a feature definition. So I'm going to come in here, we're going to call this drop inlet. All right, that's going to be the name. The code we're going to use for this is DIMB for multi-block, and we're going to put it in the utility category. We'll go ahead and put it on the storm sewer utility storm feature layer. And then for the block, we want to pick the drop inlet. Now I already have it imported, but if I didn't have it, I can import blocks, and I can go out and I can grab any drawing and import the blocks into the Feature Definition Manager. So again, you can, another improvement, I can bring in data to this. So I'm going to go ahead and select that drop inlet. I'm going to use the control codes for the insertion point, and we'll go ahead and put the point on a layer. So I'll come in here and we'll say we want that on points. We could put a label, and we could tell it whether we want to use that point in the surface or not. So I can do that. So I'll click OK. And that's going to create this definition where you can see here's the block that we created. I can modify any of the features. Okay. So now that I have that, I would save this FXL file. I would then put that out on my controller. So I have that out here already installed on my controller. As you can see here, I've got my DIMB as my code. And this is going to kind of simulate what would happen in the field. So I'm going to come into this location down here, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to measure some points. So I'm going to start and say, let's say that that drop inlet is right here in the field. So I'm just going to come over here, and we're going to measure this point here. So that's going to be our first point. Let's say we call it 0.2000. Our code is going to be DIMB. I'm put a space and put OR for the orientation. And this is going to be a feature type, so I'm going to change it to feature, and we'll hit accept. So it's located that first point, and now my next point, my survey crew would just come along here. Now we have to assume that we're seeing a drop inlet here. I'm going to come along here and I'm going to pick a secondary point. We'll select this and we'll measure this point. So here, instead of DIMB, I'm just going to call it, or OR, I'm going to get rid of the OR, and we're going to accept that point. Now I can also come over here and pick this location and measure that one for the third point. All right, so again, depending on how you set this up and how you use this will be determined how your field crew collects it. So now the field crew's gone out, they've collected all this data. Now we're going back into Business Center, and because we have our data synchronized through our cloud, our TCC, all I have to do is come in here and I'll go ahead and import the results. I'm actually simulating that here with my system, but I would do an Office sync and then select import results. I'm going to go ahead and pick on this work order that the field crew was assigned, locate utilities. And when I click OK, it's going to come in and you can see it's located those 3 points. So those are the points there. So if I go up to process feature codes, select that work order and process the source, you can see now it's inserted the block and has rotated it about those points to where I collected it. So I didn't do a very good job of collecting here, but you can see it scaled it accordingly. So if I come back out and turn on my points, you'll see those where those points are being used. So there's my insertion point, there's my first scale point, and the second point over here. So if I turn those on, you can see the points that have been located. And if I show the feature code, you'll see that as well. So depending how you set up that feature coding in the feature definition manager for your FXL file will determine how that point or that block gets handled. Just to recap, there is now this new feature to be able to have a block control point or code, as well as a new block feature definition manager. This is something I know that most other software vendors don't provide in their field to finish processing. So really shows the power of Business Center and what you can do with your as-builting in your field to finish survey workflow. An additional enhancement to the Business Center Heavy Construction Edition is to the profile viewer. If I have an alignment and I select that alignment, whether I do it from the Project Explorer or from the Plan View window, right click and go to the new profile view, you can see that it now displays additional information about my vertical alignment, such as the grade breaks, high-low points, slopes in, slopes out, so on and so forth. In addition to just viewing or the view enhancements, you can also now select that alignment or that profile and use the grips to actually modify the location of that. You can see that the data changes and adjusts and displays accordingly. So if I wanted to put this over here to get above that location, I could simply grip edit it. You still have the feature and functionality to use the alignment editor, and if I split the view here, you can see them above one or the other. And if I go to vertical, as I move this profile around, you can see that it adjusts, the data adjusts down below as well. And it is tied to my corridor, so therefore my corridor also updates. So that's just some of the new features in the profile viewer. You can also draw in this viewer now, so I can come in here and draw a polyline or a line string. So if I was to come in and simply come in here and just draw a line string, maybe this was going to be a ditch off to the side, I could create that as a vertical profile. I can select, which is nice about this of having multiple views, is if I want to change the stationing of a particular grade break, you can see that I can see it not only in horizontal, but also I have a glyph or a marker that shows up in my vertical profile as well. And if I go into the vertical profile, you can see along my alignment, you can see down here as I move my cursor in the profile view, it also displays a glyph in the plan view. So again, some nice ways to actually edit and create your profiles within these viewers. And then lastly, the other additional features is the ability to actually plot from the profile view. So again, a lot of new features, enhancements to the profile viewer. New feature inside of Business Center Heavy Construction Edition 3.7 is the connected points routine. Basically, what it allows you to do is connect a line string through a series or collection of points. So in most cases, you see this pretty typically when you're trying to as-built a site. If you're not using the field to finish or the line code processing, you basically want to play connected dots. So these are silt fences. We've identified those. If we look, we got this silt fence code. If we look at the numbers, you can see here that we've got a 103, we got a 106, or 1006, 10, 13, 14, 17, 18, 21. So it's a collection of points, and it's not really in order where I could say I want to draw from 10 through 30 or 10 through 50. However, that doesn't matter in this case, and I'll show you why. So if I go to the line string under CAD, I go to line string and I drop it down, there's this connected points routine. In the connected points routine, we'll go ahead and give this a name. We'll call it silt fence. We'll set the layer to the silt fence layer, so I'll come up here and set it on that layer. I can define by either coordinates or point IDs. You can choose either method. If I choose coordinates here, it then asks me a selection. I can either select a series of points, or I could go ahead and use the point IDs. So if I use a selection, for example, I can basically just come in here and select this series of points. So again, I have to just use my control key to select those, and then simply click apply, and you can see that it draws a line string through that collection of points. I could also just come down here under point IDs and say that, okay, we're going to go from 103 to 1148. So I would just say 1003, comma, 1148 dash, and in this case it looks like we pretty much go to 1158. So I would say 1158, comma, and then it looks like 1165 dash. Let's see what we end up here. If we go to 1198, and let's see if that results. Okay, we may not have points through there, but if I click apply, you can see it's actually zigzagging back and forth to another set of lines. So if we use the points, we could draw a line string like that. Or if I just go to selection and I select this series of points through here and select apply, I can do that. Or I could come down here under points and say I want to go from 1003, comma, to 1148 and apply that there. So I've connected that silt fence, if it actually truly connected. Again, just pretty slick ways of drawing and connecting lines, or drawing lines by connecting points. Takes just a matter of minutes, especially if you isolate the points, and that's what I've done here, is I've isolated my toes from my tops, my silt fences, and so on. Okay, so again, the connected points feature, new feature in Business Center Heavy Construction Edition 3.71. This next enhancement is a simple enhancement, but yet it makes the process of drawing multiple line strings a whole lot easier, especially if it's the same type of line string. So when you're doing, maybe adding break lines to your design or your model, this command becomes helpful. So if I'm using the line string command, initially it wants me to come in and put in, a name for the line. So if I just said, top, we'll call them top, and for the layer, we'll go ahead and we're going to put that on a layer called top of berm, or whatever it happens to be. We'll set the layer color, we'll make it magenta, and we'll just click OK. So when you fill out this information and you click OK, every time you go to create a new line string, you're going to be prompted for that information. Well, what's new in the line string command is this command button down here, which is new. So if I was to come in here and just start drawing in some lines, so I'm playing connected dots, we know there's a faster way to do this now, but let's just say I'm doing that, and I want to go and I want to draw this one. Well, instead of having to create a new line string and then repopulate the layer and the name of it, if I just click on new, it starts a new line. So I can come in here and draw this second line running along this edge over here. All right, so the same thing, I can just go back down to new. So it keeps the name, it keeps the layer, and it just speeds up the process of drafting in or drawing in multiple lines with the same name and the same layer for that particular line string. The next feature we're going to demonstrate this new in Business Center Heavy Construction Edition 3.7 is the surface intersect. Now we have a surface tie, and if I go to the surface tie to show you the example, I'm going to use this pad here and I'm going to tie it to the existing ground or the existing surface. So when I do this and I pick to the right hand side, I can put in a spacing, let's just say 25, and I can put in my slope. So let's say I want to go in a cut at a 2:1 and then a fill slope at a 3:1. Now I know my pad is sitting up above my existing ground. When I do this, it projects out and shows where it ties into my existing ground surface at those slopes. But this is a constant 3:1 and fill all the way around because I'm in that fill situation. The nice thing about this is it's dynamic, and if I raise and lower the elevation of the pad, it will adjust this site. So if we look here, we can see we're 3:1, we're shooting way out here, and we know that, hey, maybe that's too much. We want to bring this area back. We're good up here, maybe at 3:1, we're going to leave it that way. So what we want to do is we want to go from a 2:1 slope to a 3:1 slope from this upper corner over here. So if I was to come back here and look at the surface tie, go to its properties, and change this to a 2:1, all right, you can see that my 2:1 slope is going to be somewhere up in here, all right. And if I went to maybe a 2.5 to 1, then you can see that I'm down over here more. Okay, so I can play with this and I can break this and explode it, but what the surface intersect does actually makes life a little bit easier. So I'm going to delete this surface tie here, and I'm going to go to the surface intersect, and we'll just call this northeast tie, and we're going to put it on a layer. We'll put it on a new layer called surface intersect, and we'll change the color to let's go ahead and make it green, and we'll give it some thickness, about 0.6, and that's fine. We'll just click OK. So you pick the surface you want to intersect, which is the existing ground. We're going to pick our coordinates, so we're going to say we want to go from this point here. The elevation is fine, that's 100, we're going to use that. The bearing, we'll say we'll start here. We want to go from this about this location here at a -2 to 1. All right. We want to do multiple, and if we go with multiple, let's say we increase this to 10. We don't have to worry about a point ID because down here we're going to define the line string by coordinates, not point ID. If we put in a point ID, it would actually make physical points along here and connect the line, but we don't want that. I just want the line itself. So my final bearing will be somewhere up in this area, and then the final vertical angle, I'm going to put a -3 to 1. I could put a % slope as well. Okay. Now when I click apply, what happens is you can see it draws that line. So from this point out here is a 2:1, and then the slope varies all the way through until it gets over to here to 3:1. So based on our initial surface ties, we now have a 3D line string at this corner that's been tied out at a 3:1. So we could repeat that over here and go from a 3:1 to a 3:1 or a 2:1, and then what we could do is join all those together, and we've then provided a slope intersection or a surface intersection from a particular point. A lot of different things you can do with this, but that's kind of a very simple approach to understand how this command works. There's some new improvements to the change elevation command. So if I go to the data prep, I can select the elevation option here, or change elevation. And you can see that I have different ways of changing the elevation of an object, such as the delta elevation, absolute, undefined, surface, or I can say relative to point. So if I was to select this, I can come in here and pick an object. So let's say I pick this point object here, and I want to change the coordinate or the elevation from a point or a coordinate. So if, let's say that for this example, I want my line or this catch basin to be 2% slope from this point relative to this point here. So I got it, maybe I'm putting that catch basin in on a road or a drain inlet or something. Well, what I can do is I can come in here and it says what is my starting elevation and then what's my vertical angle. So if I put a -2% and apply, it will adjust that particular elevation. So let's go ahead and turn on the elevation of that point so we can see this a little better. So you can see I'm at about 98, right? So if I was to come up here and change it to 0, apply that, it sets it at 100. If I was to come in here and put a 2% slope and apply it, it adjusts it in an upwards direction. So you can see I can easily come in here and just change the elevation of that point using this change elevation command. So again, I come in here -2. I could actually do a -2 to 1 and apply that, and you can see it changes it at a 2 to 1 slope. So different methods of input will control the elevation of that particular point. There's also been a new improvement to the measure command. So just like we have the ability to measure an angle or an inverse or a point to a surface, we now have the ability to use the measure point here. So if I select measure point, I can pick any point. It doesn't have to be an actual point object, but anywhere on my project, and it will actually show me the X, Y, and Z value along with what surface it is that I'm selecting. If I select this point here, you can see that it's just picking that point arbitrarily there. There's nothing that I've actually selected. I just selected an X, Y, and a Z. If I do the endpoint of the line, you can see that it's going to show that it's a CAD polyline. If I was to actually just grab that point there, you can see that it's a point object. So not only am I measuring an X, Y, and a Z, but it will also snap to an object if I turn the snap on. So here it's snapping and giving me the Z value. And that data is being shown up over here in our preview window, as well as on the plan view or in 3D view. And I can save that so that I know what that point is. So I can give it a name, save it as a point, and even put it on a layer and assign a color to it. So if I click save there, let's turn on that layer, you can see that it's put that point and stored it now into the project. So it's actually saved it as a label per se. So if I select it, you can see that it's a point measurement object. Okay, so if you grip edit it, I can move it around and you can see that it's actually changing. So it's kind of a neat way to add a label to a project for a point label. So that's just a quick preview of some of the top features that have been improved in Business Center Heavy Construction Edition 3.7 or 3.71 is actually the latest download. There's a lot of others. Like I said, read the release notes. One of the probably major additions to the software is now we have a compaction ribbon where you can create a dynamic compaction plan. So if you're using the DPS 900 compaction system, you can create your plan in Business Center, send it out to your machine. When you actually do the compaction out on site and perform the work, you can then bring that data back into Business Center to create your quality reports. So again, another step in the direction of the construction continuum of providing solution for compaction as well as the rest of the construction operations that happen on a particular project. So again, take a look at the release notes, and if you have any more information or you need more information, contact your local site tech dealer.